Hi, I'm Gregg Tripoli. Welcome to another episode of Bedtime Stories with OHA. I'm ready for bed, but before I turn in, I want to tell you another one of my favorite stories from our local history. This one is about our sports history, particularly professional basketball. Professional basketball came to Syracuse in 1946. Danny Biasone, who was an Italian immigrant, came here as a child, founded and owned the Syracuse Nationals. Danny was, unlike most other NBA teams from big cities, Syracuse was a kind of a small, scrappy, working class city, industrial powerhouse and innovation capital, but it was, at the time, a small city compared to some of the other NBA franchises. Danny, unlike a lot of those other owners, he really got his income from owning a bowling alley and restaurant and bar in Eastwood, right here in the Eastwood section of Syracuse. And this was a time when basketball was really increasing in interest. And Danny built a really good team, a scrappy team from Syracuse. And within a few years, Syracuse became a real contender in the NBA, had a great roster, and in the 1953-54 season, Syracuse made it to the championships. And in a really tight championship, brought it to the seventh game, and against the Lakers. They were from Minnesota at the time, and but still a dynasty, a powerhouse dynasty in the NBA. And Syracuse lost because the Lakers were a big and strong and slow team, and they were able to, once they got a lead, they were able to run the clock out, passing the ball and dribbling the ball and keeping possession of the ball so that the clock ran out and they would win the game. It was something that really started to affect the game of basketball. It was getting really boring. People were losing interest because teams could run that clock out and the scores were really low. There wasn't a lot of activity. So Danny Biasone and Leo Ferris, who was the general manager of the Syracuse Nationals, decided, after that 1954 season, that they really needed to do something to speed up the game and make it more interesting. And so one night in that bowling alley in Eastwood, on the back of a napkin, Danny Biasone and Leo Ferris came up with a formula that they thought would work. And what they did was very simple. They looked at games that had good scores and good activity, and they looked at the stats to see how many shots it took to make that many points, and then they divided by the number of seconds in a game, and they came up with 24. And they figured that in order for a game to keep moving and the score to keep up and for it to be interesting, that somebody had to take a shot every 24 seconds. And so that was a rule that they practiced right here at Blodgett School in Syracuse, and became the 24-second shot clock rule that really sped up the game, changed the game of basketball, and saved the game of basketball forever. Now, in the 1954-55 season, Syracuse had a great roster. I mean, they had a great team. They were a fast team, and so speeding up the game really benefited the Syracuse Nationals as well. You had guys like Dolph Schayes. I mean, he's one of the top 50 NBA players of all time. Paul Seymour, scrappy, good all-around player. You had Earl Lloyd. Now, Earl Lloyd was the first African-American man to ever set foot on an NBA court. This started his career in Washington in 1950. So this is a few years later, but still it was very unusual to have African-Americans playing in the NBA. Earl Lloyd was a great player, future Hall of Famer, good all-around player. In 1954, another African-American joined the Syracuse Nationals, a guy named Jim Tucker. Jim came up from Jim Crow South, through a miracle of fate, went to Duquesne University and established himself there, and came to Syracuse to play for the Nationals. He wasn't a starter, but Jim was a good player and a fast player. Now, in that season, in 1955, in a criminally under-recorded game against the New York Knicks, so Syracuse Nats against the New York Knicks, right here in Syracuse at the War Memorial, Jim Tucker comes off the bench and goes onto the court and gets a triple-double. So this is double points, double digits in points, rebounds, and assists, and gets this triple-double in a record 17 minutes. Now, that's an NBA record that lasted for 63 years. A really amazing feat when you think about it. Getting a triple-double is difficult enough in a full game, but in doing it in 17 minutes, which was really unheard of. So the team is doing really well in that season. They make it again to the championships, and it's against the Pistons. They're from Fort Wayne at that time, and you have this amazing rivalry in game that again goes to 7 full games, and in the 7th game, it ends up being tied, goes into overtime, and Syracuse wins by 1 point, 92-91, and becomes NBA national champions. Now, and that's because the Pistons could not run down the clock. So the 24-second shot clock really helped Syracuse Nationals win that NBA championship in 1955. When the Nats won the championship, Earl Lloyd and Jim Tucker became the first 2 African Americans on an NBA championship team. So really, the Nats are helping to integrate the NBA at this point. Very unusual and controversial, but a good thing for our history. On the day that the Nats players got their trophies and their checks for the championship, Jim Tucker was on his way back, went back to his apartment in Eastwood, and the apartment building was on fire. And so he had to evacuate the building. I mean, it started in the basement, so the building was really becoming engulfed in flames. He got out of the building and realized that he forgot his check, his championship check, and left it in his apartment. So he went back into the building, got his check, and on the way out, he heard a little girl crying. And he went and found this adorable little blonde, blue-eyed toddler, a 2-year-old, and picked her up and took her out of the burning building, made headlines in the paper. Jim didn't stay in the NBA for that long, a few years. He went on to Harvard and then into an amazing career where he fought for equality, equal justice, equal pay, equal representation. And we made actually readily apparent films, readily apparent media out of Austin, Texas, in partnership with OHA, made a film called Let 'Em Know You're There, the story about Jim Tucker and his triple-double and the Syracuse Nats and the 24-second shot clock. And it really tells that whole story. Now, Jim is actually was suffering from Alzheimer's and was in the middle of that disease when we made the film. And it's interesting, he didn't at that time remember anything about the national championship. He didn't remember anything about the triple-double or about the ring ceremony, but he remembered saving that little girl. So the film kind of goes beyond the typical sports fare and really speaks to what's worth remembering, what sticks with you, the sort of accomplishments that really speak to the character of an individual. It features local icons like Sean Kirst and David Ramsey, who wrote the book The Nats, and Manny Breland from our community. These guys, Earl Lloyd and Jim Tucker, were really role models for young African-American men, not only here in Syracuse, but around the country. We just got news this morning that Jim passed away last Thursday from complications with Alzheimer's. And so our thoughts are with his wife, Jan, and the entire extended Tucker family at this time. Eventually, Danny Bison sold the Syracuse Nationals to the Philadelphia, and they became the Philadelphia 76ers. There's a great story, actually, about the film that we made, Let 'Em Know You're There. We finished filming at the end, really in the beginning of 2018, and the record that Jim held for the triple-double was still in effect at that time, still 63 years later. We had spent all the money. We finished the film. We did a little sneak preview here at the Palace Theater. We did the trailer. We did all the marketing materials, getting ready to send the film out to festivals. And Jokic from the Denver Nuggets broke the record. And so we had a dilemma. but I actually sold my executive producer on-screen credit to a local company, Breuer Construction Company, and happily so, because they gave us the money to go back in and finish the film, get Jokic on camera, which really made the film much better, and re-edit that part of the film. So I was really happy to see that Breuer, who is a company that really supports so many organizations in our community, got that kind of credit on the film. So I gave up the credit, but I got to keep the Emmy. So in August of 2019, mid-August, we were notified that the film was nominated for an Emmy Award and that the ceremonies would be at the end of September. So I got on a plane, went to the ceremonies, and, you know, I have to admit, I've watched these award ceremonies occasionally throughout my life, and I have to say I have fantasized about what it would be like to be in that audience as a nominee and hear your name called when they open the envelope and say, and the Emmy goes to. It was a surreal experience for sure, and one that I hope I will never forget. So please, let him know you're there. Emmy Award-winning film about the great Jim Tucker, whose memory we will always honor here at OHA in his time in Syracuse with the Nats. The Nats, a great book by David Ramsey about the Syracuse Nationals. Dolph Shays, a book by Dolph Grundon here, and also Moon Fixer, Sean Kerr's book about Earl Lloyd, are all available at OHA's online store. These are great Father's Day gifts, folks, and please check out OHA's online store. That's it for this segment. I look forward to seeing you next time on Bedtime Stories at OHA. Thanks for watching.